My name's Alex Howard. I write and work for O'Reilly Media. And last year I started working there and writing about this open government world, what Tim O'Reilly calls Gov 2.0, this idea of applying some of the principles from the internet, from the web, back to government, and thinking about some of the ways that that's going to affect this intersection of society and government and citizens. And some of the people here have already talked about some of this, right? Samasource talked about what's happening in here in Kenya, and how they're starting to open up and using some of the data and mobile applications. And of course Jen talked about Code for America, and that's as a Gov 2.0 an organization as you can get. So looking back, obviously I've already put up some slides here, and it gives context. They speak for themselves, right? The internet's been changing the way that we live, the way we connect with other people, and now we're seeing something that's very different. First moved from the internet, then to mobile, now we're into this different space, big data. And if you're in the tech world, you mentioned neuroscience, right? You know that this is something that's changing the way that we do all sorts of things, from elections to sales, you name it. When you think about open data, it changes things even further, right? Kenya has put up its open data platform earlier this year. There are now, I think, over 20 of them around the world. There's lots of cities in this country. There are an increasing number of countries overseas. And different things happen when you open up your data. It allows people to see what's happening inside of government when they work in government. It allows people outside of the government to see what's happening. Sometimes the citizens themselves are scraping the data from government to make it more open, and more usable. And things can be created from it. So this is a great example of Android apps up in Boston, right? When Boston, working through a really complicated process over a great deal of time, actually made real-time data, developers could take it and make transit apps. That actually has a downstream effect in citizens. They can figure out when the next train is. They can figure out when the next thing is. Open up health data. Community health centers, all kinds of indicators from HHS, that's the Department of Health and Human Services. You can start to bake that into apps as well. It has a downstream effect on citizens because they can then figure out what they can do. Of course, citizens can create data themselves. This is a map of Haiti, OpenStreetMap, right? In the absence of maps, people could start to help create them collaboratively. Thousands of people pouring up online and trying to figure out how to give people on the ground devices that had those maps on them. And there's other kinds of open data too, in this case election data in Afghanistan. This is probably the most insight that people there or anywhere else had into what was happening in Afghanistan. And it was all available online, open source interface, open source maps. And then of course open data and WikiLeaks, right? This is a way of thinking about mapping and a way of thinking about the way that governments can be opened up, whether they want to or not, that people had never really thought about. And it's really changed the framework for how government itself thinks about it. And if you look at how the White House has reacted, it's changed their reactions too. So here's the problem. When you call something open, it's not always open. Being open is a really hot thing these days. You can say you're open source, you can say you use open data, you can say you're open government, you can say you're open anything. Well, the problem is that not everything's open. Jen mentioned things getting scanned in. It's pretty hard to make machine-readable data out of a PDF. It just is. The problem is that a lot of government stuff is in PDFs. Lots of other stuff is in PDFs too. I like PDFs, right? I can read them on my iPhone. I can read them on lots of other devices, but they're not machine-readable data. And there's lots of organizations which have given really good, solid understandings of what being open means. Usually it means making your stuff usable elsewhere. It's not hard to find these definitions. Now, what's interesting is that there are other fields that are trying to become open themselves. Open science is a really interesting space here, right? Neuroscience is one area. There's many others as well. And there's principles that have been introduced in that space as well. So not just open washing, things that actually exist. And what happens when you start to get into these really interesting intersections between mobile and citizens and science is that you can map out unusual things. This is radiation data that's collected from both citizen source sensors in Japan and government itself. Now, if you think more broadly, though, there are some challenges. Here's a map of the Earth at night. You see what's missing? All those lit up places, all those places where people are connected or not, where people have electricity or not. If you don't have the connection, you can't get the data. If you don't have literacy around data or on information about being able to get there, you can't do more than that. It's not enough to simply say, be transparent. People have to be able to get something from it. And the risk here is that just by opening up data, you give people who've got all the power in society too much of it. So what can you do? Well, some people are trying to figure out ways to bridge this new divide. It's not just about a digital divide anymore, right? It's a data divide, right? You need to figure out how to translate these incredible streams into something people can get to. In this case, open transit data. And Android developers are doing that. So this is all of you. Here's an example of an open source app in Chicago which allows citizens to use an Android app, and don't kid yourselves, there's lots of low-income people who have these things through Cricket and Metro PCS to find food, to find a local shelter, to use open data to learn more about the world around them. You can do that. Thank you.